Hello, guys. Welcome to another exciting episode of Conspire a Theory. I have with me one of my favorite interviewers, Michaela Ford from Paranormal or What, all the way from across the pond. Are your arms tired, flapping all the way over here to this side of the internets?
I am. I am. It was a very long journey.
Well, let's hope that we could keep things rolling because I'm really glad to have you here. Your interviews is one of the very few ones that I just loved it so much because we covered so many topics and interesting things that I just had to ask for your permission to port it onto my channel and rebroadcast it so that way people could get a hang of it. Because we talked about such general topics so much that I really enjoyed talking to you, and you got a good head on your shoulders. And even though we may disagree on some stuff, we could definitely talk it out and see that we really don't disagree at that all on the principle of the matter. Why don't we go ahead and start off and just tell a little bit about your show and then a little bit about yourself, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Chris. I'm really pleased to be here. So my podcast is called Paranormal or What, and I decided to call it that because I was actually listening to. I can't remember the name of the show, which is really bad, but it was another American podcast, and the man on it said, "Is that paranormal or what?" And I thought, "Oh, that'd be a fantastic name for a podcast." So I kind of stole it. It's probably a good job I can't remember who it was, and then they can't sue me. But
When
yeah,
when you get really big, I'm sure they'll remember.
yeah, I'm sure they will. So I started during lockdown around 2020 when everybody was bored and stuck in their houses, and I'm sure there are thousands of podcasts that started that way. And I've been very lucky to carry on with it. So it's an interview based podcast. And I've had your good self on and many other people from the USA and the UK as well. Um, and I just like to dig into people's brains and find out what got them into the paranormal and what sort of things they've seen and what they like to do, really. I've always been into the paranormal myself. I had a couple of very strange incidents when I was a child, which led to
Yeah,
me
yeah.
reading
Well,
lots
I
of stuff.
definitely would like to hear about a few of them later. Right now, I understand you're very prolific in your experiences, as far as just your technical experience as a well-rounded individual. A bit of a, I would call you like a Renaissance woman because you're a bit of a teacher, an actress, Doctor Who fan. We'll get into that. I can't let you go without talking about Doctor Who. But before we get to that, you have a lot of professional experience that really that is really something that's not too common in this field. Usually people they'll either have a journalism degree or something of that nature, but you're a very well-rounded and studious individual. If you could, just let us know a little bit about that, about your resume, if that would be good.
Um, well, originally, I went to art school for 4 years. I've done a bit of everything really, and after that, I decided to go into acting. So I went to drama school, as you do, and was a professional actress for a while. It didn't quite take off for me in the way I wanted it to. But then I met my husband while I was acting, and we got together and had children, and everything went out of the window for several years. Um, and then I just came back to the paranormal. And in my day life, I decided I needed more of a regular job. So I retrained as a primary school teacher. And I've also been writing for Paranormality magazine and starting my podcast. So, oh, and I also volunteer for my local hospital radio. So I do a bit of DJing as well.
So
And
you
not to forget being an investigator as well.
DJing. So you do that like DJ. Do you have a DJ name? Like, was it like DJ Ginger or something like that?
No, maybe I
DJ
should
Ginger
have.
Lightning.
No,
Yeah,
just my
DJ
name.
Ginger. Yeah, DJ Ginger Lightning. That'd be great. You get on the skit. and all of that nature. That would be that's something I learned about. Now that I know about that, I'm going to find jokes to talk about every single time we meet. Now you're going to hear me some DJ Ginger Lightning joke or something of that nature. Yeah, it's
Oh,
as far as the paranormal stuff, like aside from I think one of your experiences that I heard that really stuck out involved like three grim, dark-looking individuals in a field herding cattle or something like that.
that's right.
Could you relate that experience, please?
Yeah, so this was the first really sort of surprising experience I had. I was about 9 years old and I was at school. Myself and my friends were all playing out. And in our small village, it's in West Yorkshire, which is in the north of England. And it's a tiny village surrounded by countryside and hills. And as in many, many schools, there are sort of legends. I don't know whether has the legend of Bloody Mary reached America? Do you know the legend of Bloody Mary? Where you have to stand in front of the mirror and say it 3 times at 12 o'clock, and then she'll
Yeah,
appear
yeah,
behind you. Yeah,
it's proliferated and it's everywhere.
yeah,
And we pretty much have many Bloody Mary S type offshoots now, such as Candyman and other
yeah.
extended universe. Yeah, we got the Bloody Mary DLC pack here for sure.
Yeah, so we had that, but then we had another one which was more localized, and it was about zombies. Now, I have to say that when I was 9 years old, I had never seen a zombie as you see them on TV today. It wasn't the undead walking around with bits of skin hanging off. To us at the time, we thought zombies were just, I suppose, ghosts really, or dead people. And we had this rumor that one of the local derelict houses was occupied by zombies, these creatures that we called them. Anyway, one day we were playing out in the playground, and another child shouted, "I can see the zombies." And so, of course, we all ran over to look. And across two fields, there were three black hooded figures, and they looked like Grim Reapers, and they had wooden staffs that they were walking with, and they were herding cattle silently. You couldn't see their faces or anything. And so I asked if I could, one of the adults, if I could go over and look closer. And of course, she said no. And there were about 20 of us, and we were all hysterical and shouting and saying, "I can see the zombies, it's the zombies, it's the zombies." Now, the really interesting thing was that the adults couldn't see them. The adults couldn't see what we were looking at. We were pointing and shouting, and it was probably about 100 meters away. But they couldn't see. They could see the cattle walking, they couldn't see anything at all. And it frightened them so much that they rang the bell and everyone had to go in. And then the teachers gave us a big talk about how we hadn't seen anything and we were just scaring ourselves and it was just a hallucination or something. So that's the first half of the story. And then move on 20 years. And I went to see one of my friends who lives behind the school. And her little house overlooks on the same field. And as I was stood there, it brought back the memory to me. I was looking out of her kitchen window, having a cup of tea, as we do over here. Um, and I said, "Oh gosh, the most strange thing happened when I was at school. We saw these creatures. We called them the zombies, but they were sort of dressed in black and they looked like Green Reapers." And she said, "Oh yes, I see them all the time." And my blood just went cold because it was exactly the same thing. She verified my story 20 years later. So
Hmm.
it was quite something. I looked into them, and apparently they're called the Geni Culculati, which is their,
That's a mouthful.
yeah, it's a Latin name for land spirits. And actually, if you go around the north of England and look at the Church of England, the Christian churches, they're often engraved in the side of the doorways as you go into the church, and they're protection spirits. And they also pertain to children. So maybe that's why only the children could see them. And that really set off my massive interest in the paranormal.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's it's very rare that you come across like protective or non-malevolent spirits in this nature. Usually everything's spooky and it's like has some sort of demonic twang and it's out to get you.
Yeah,
With this one, this is more of a more wholesome type of thing, which I guess is a commonality that I guess you and me would have had because my experiences, paranormal experience, had been on the more wholesome side.
yeah,
And it's nice to hear someone else like not have a monster come running down their hallway or something of that nature. So that's pretty good.
yeah. I think
Of
most of
the
my experiences have been wholesome, actually. I'm very lucky, I think, touch wood. A lot of my experiences have been non threatening and non dark. And I hope it continues like that.
Yeah, that's something that's very rare because in this community the scare factor seems to be what's pushed to the forefront is like how spooky can we make it, how every single asylum is haunted, or every hotel or whatever dark corner is haunted by a little girl, named Sally or something that's lost or something of that nature, and it's always spooky type, turn to the nine type of stuff. And at this point I think it's getting old and performative, and the more that we see that I guess that's whatever else is out there is not always something to be afraid of, but can be something, like almost in a way like protective or like more neighborly in nature is sort of, a welcome difference that I definitely like to indulge in. The As far as your coming up in the paranormal, did you always have like a background in the paranormal, or was there like, did you like see something on a television show and decide, like, what was your favorite story that brought you into this fold?
Oh gosh, I honestly don't know if I could pin it down to one thing. To be honest, I we used to in England we used to have some really good TV shows, but they were not quite like the ones that you had. Ours were more stories, so we had something called Tales of the Unexpected, which you may well have had as well over there.
Yeah,
Um,
we've had similar formatted shows such as The Outer Limits and The Twilight Zone, which were more, um, I guess, anthologies. Yeah,
yeah.
so I understand the format. Yeah.
Yeah, we had the Twilight Zone as well, which I really enjoyed. But to be honest, there wasn't anything until um, I would say the maybe 2001, 2002, when we had this brand new TV show called Most Haunted,
Hmm.
which ran for quite lots and lots of years, and it had quite I mean, everybody used to watch it. I couldn't actually believe that there was a program on the TV that someone like me would really like about real life ghost hunting. I could not believe it was on. I was so excited, and I never missed one for years and years and years. And sadly, in its later years, there was a lot of sort of shenanigans that went on, and it was discovered that some people weren't necessarily being very truthful and all that sort of thing, which was a
Yeah.
shame. But I think that was what got me started into thinking that maybe I could do this, maybe I could have a go, and looking for paranormal groups to join myself.
Yeah, that's good. That is interesting that there's this sort of like what used to be niche entertainment has now gone mainstream. And I guess in some instances, some people feel like there's the double edged sword. Like we juggle a lot of double edged swords in this field, unfortunately. but there's that instance of, something, it brings in the normies, but then because of that, it's sort of, a lot of people feel that it's watered down from the reality of the situation. And then there's like the people who are more like niche, that it's clearly built for, like us. We get something out of it, but sometimes it's just not enough. And I
Yeah.
guess that's why so many of us enter the field. Of course, except myself. I'm not talking about myself in that instance. I have no problem being looking at this stuff from the safety of my desk. I have no problem hiding behind my keyboard in this instance. But as far as what about this community, this industry, that makes you want to go out there and step onto the field and stick your fingers into it, so much, so to speak? Like, what are you hoping to get out of it by doing so?
Well, it's very simple, really, and it's why I stick with it. It's that I suppose, in a way, I want reassurance that there's something after we die. I want to know if I can find out what it is, and I want to find out if there is evidence of it. And that's where it all started for me. I think probably a fear of dying. Um, and wanting to know that there was going to be something else. I'm not very good at, it's the same with, I'm not very good with religion either. I'm not very good at the blind trust. No, you just have to trust that we're telling you everything's going to be okay, and you just have to, unerringly believe that. And I'm not very good at that. I'm very much a researcher. I want to know what's going on. How can I find out? And the paranormal community is extremely diverse, and I think that what I've had to do for my own sanity is only take notice of the bits that are good for me, only take notice of the bits that are good for my mental health, or let's say not bad for my mental health, because it's a very, very complicated field with a lot of very complicated people in. And it's very hard sometimes to sort of sort through all of that, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I can understand that. You and me have had lengthy conversations on your show discussing the community element of this phenomenon, and the sometimes the toxicity of certain groups and individuals, certain galvanized movements. Like right now, the disclosure movement is going onward, and I feel like a lot of the conversation, like a lot of people are trying to glom onto it for, maybe not so honest reasons. Maybe some people, they do it out of misguided hope, or I don't know. I'm From what I've seen, I'm not convinced. But as far as other people, if they get something out of it, that's fine. Do you have any opinions regarding the disclosure movement, or what you've seen so far, that from your angle, that you can add?
Um, I think all I can say is I constantly vacillate between opinions. I think um, I don't like to pin myself down because my opinions constantly change the more I find out about things. And actually, if I'm actually holding my hands up, sorry, my broken finger, hello, silly me, I tripped up and bashed myself in a doorway. Um, I'm not actually sure if I completely understand all the disclosures. It gets very, very complicated the further you get into it. And I have stuck my neck into it quite a bit and then quickly reeled it back in because I thought, this is over my head. I'm getting lost now. So, and I wouldn't like to give too much of a firm opinion on something that I'm not, well, no one's an expert in it except for the people who are actually doing it. But um, I suppose if you were asking me if there were other beings from other worlds on our planet, should we tell everybody? It's a very difficult question. I sometimes stand when I'm at my primary school in my normal job. I stand there on the on the field while I'm watching all the children play, and I look up into the sky and I think, would I really want a spaceship to come down right now and go, here we are? And there is part of me that would love that so much. And there's another part of me that thinks it would be the worst thing ever for everybody because it would literally change the world as we know it. And I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do. And sorry if that's not really the answer you were looking for, but I don't have. I would be really, really excited if I could stand in my back garden and you know, do a CE5 and call a ship down and beings got out and I met them like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I would love that so much. I'm not sure whether it would be a good idea to put that on the rest of the world.
Yeah, I can understand your cautious optimism, and I do understand that position. I probably give you some pushback, as you know, in our conversations we always have pushback and forth. In my opinion, when I hear people discuss the overwhelming stuff, oftentimes it's held with this sort of like, well, what about the religion? And they'll throw in the religious aspect. And the thing is, but the religions for decades, as I remember, have already been poised this question and have answered it thoroughly. Is that if there's, an out there, that it wouldn't change things for them, that it would just, reinforce the their it would reinforce their dogma as far as it, there being, more to, whatever their insert God is, that their theology would just reinforce it. And when I hear like, and this isn't a criticism of you specifically, this applies to everybody because there's a lot of cautionary hosts and stuff and people in various positions like yourself and myself who take this cautionary approach of like, well, this disclosure shouldn't happen because the religions are going to be rocked. And I feel that that's from a sort of a position of, I guess, trying to, I guess, gatekeep on on not maliciously, but like unintentional, that it's sort of like we're trying to speak for our neighbors on what we believe is their better, what we believe is best for them without, truly, having that conversation with them. And I think on that step, it's as us, we're overstepping that. But, but I do understand and respect your answer because it is a good answer. It is good, cautious optimism is always a good position to start from. But as far as this disclosure movement, what we want, I don't believe that the current disclosure movement is going to give it to us. I, but because it's so, there's so much, money wrapped up into it and such, I can understand why people glom onto it.
Yeah, I think that actually at the moment you know, people like the big governments around the world and maybe even the military, I think they're already making decisions for us as to whether we're allowed to know about it. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone else to do with religion. The thing that I worry about is just the general populations of the world. Would they just freak out? Would there just be chaos? Would things get destroyed? Would it just be massive scale panic around the world with people pillaging and, it could just be complete chaos. That's the thing I worry about. I mean, I wouldn't like to tell anyone what to do, but I think that's what I would worry about.
Yeah, I can understand that worry, but then again, we get that anyways when our favorite sports teams lose. The world goes to hell in some small pocket of the world. There's always going to be a riot somewhere over some issue. So yeah, I don't know. I feel a bit differently on the issue, but it's not so much about us butting heads about it, but I do think that we sort of come to an impasse on that issue. In regarding to the the other issues like with paranormal stuff like this, aside from aliens and stuff like that, how do you feel about like the expanded cryptid fields like of that nature where people are like talking about Bigfoot and Dogman and all that stuff of this nature? What is your opinion on that avenue of the paranormal?
It's been. I'd just like to start by saying it's been a new avenue of adventure for me over the last 4 years, because before I started my podcast, I was really just interested in the idea of ghost spirits, poltergeists, all those sorts of things. And I hadn't really considered cryptids at all. And it wasn't until I started interviewing people who had seen these things, believed they had seen these things in the flesh, that I started to think, well, maybe they could be real then. And in the last 4 years, I've done a lot of reading about different cryptids, and I have to say that I do believe that Bigfoot is real. I'm not sure, because I don't know, I'm not sure whether it's a physical creature or whether it's a creature that can come in between dimensions. Um, I don't really know. I love watching Expedition Bigfoot, I have to say. I'm glued to the edge of my seat every time I watch it. And I just think, I go from side to side the whole time. I did spend a lot of the first 2 or 3 years thinking that it was a physical creature. I was lucky enough to interview Cliff Barrackman, and I was completely convinced that it was a physical creature. Then, the more I've sort of read about it and read people's experiences, I'm now not sure whether it is dimensional, but I do believe in it. So we'll say that for that. Um, Dogman, um, my good friend Aaron Dees, who I worked with at Paranormality magazine, has done um, some really good documentaries on Dogman, things like werewolves, and I am fairly convinced there's a lot of history in the UK actually about werewolves rather than dogmen if they're separate. Um, so that
Yeah.
really does interest me. I do, but when it comes to other things, I don't know. It's really hard. I do believe there is a part of me that believes that anything can come through from other dimensions, and I'm becoming more and more convinced as I go along that creatures can come through into our reality from other realities.
Yeah, yeah. The Aaron Dees, I haven't had a chance yet to speak to him on my show. I've met him several times in person because he technically lives right up the street from me. In the same neighborhood in the same state practically. So me and him cross paths quite often, and I loved his Dogman Triangle. The documentary was fantastic with him and Shannon LeGros talking to a lot of familiar faces that I've spoken to, oftentimes. And I understand that I think it's in deeper lore, there is a lot of what would fit the Dogman mold that was earlier relegated to, werewolves and stuff of this nature. And I guess we're sort of like re-looking through our history, re-examining our history through the Dogman lens, as opposed to, not thinking so much as werewolves anymore. Because I am familiar, I've done some digging into some lore regarding the entities such as the Wolver, which was, sort of a Hodag-like entity, in that it was sort of like a fictitious creation, but still, had an impact on the culture. And then we have like in my neck of the woods, we have the Converse werewolf, which is a classic Dogman encounter that takes place in the late 1800s, and that was an intriguing story. I'll tell you some other time, but just for the sake, we'll get to it later. But the I do find it so fascinating that there is a cultural and historical precedent for the dogman, and yet it's still regarded as something new. I guess this sort of new school of thought regarding the dogman, and I find it fascinating. One of the things, of course, I bitch and moan about, of course, is the communities involved with lots of these are very, you know, confrontational, galvanized, and oftentimes toxic, unfortunately. But the core element in the phenomenon of itself is rather bewitching, and I'm totally there. As far as if there's even the one-offs of something like we had something called the Enfield Horror. It was sort of a slimy kangaroo-like entity that hopped around. That was regarded as a three-legged beast of some sort, and these like the Sandown clown and the Vegetable Man and all these interesting characters that
Yeah,
are
we
rather
had one.
intriguing.
There's a place called Cannock Chase up in the north of England, which I have explored at night. I went camping there, and it is very spooky. And there's loads and loads of lore from that place, from Dogman to Black Eyed Children to ghosts, and you name it, everything's there, including one which I thought I don't know, I just can't take it seriously, which is Pig Man. So it's a man with a pig's head that has apparently been seen there as well. But I guess if you subscribe to the idea that portals can open and creatures can come in from other dimensions, I suppose they could look like anything, really. Do you
Yeah,
know what?
yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you was, what do you think about the idea of a tulpa? And for anyone that's listening that doesn't know, the idea is that it's something that thousands or hundreds of thousands of people believe in, and because they believe in it, it becomes physically manifested. So, say, I don't know, like the Slender Man or something like that. Do you think we can create creatures?
I believe that a lot of these creatures have always been here, and we've just found new ways to identify them. And I call it cultural pollution. And
Okay.
I understand. I believe that there is a collective unconsciousness that when this otherworldly stuff, it draws from that to specifically mask itself as another phenomenon that I refer to as gentrification, which is the where the grays have become the prolific entity, front running entity of alien encounters as of late. And I largely blame Whitley Strieber for that, for the proliferation of his book and how popular it was. And because of that, yeah, I do feel if that ties into Tulpaism in a sense, I that thread is open, and I feel that my current model that I'm working with does account for that because, like I said earlier, we had like characters like the Wendigo and the Ashman and all these other type of characters are now being regarded as rakes. And the
Yeah.
rake, of course, was a popular copy pasta that then, it's sort of it's sort of like a mold that fits so many other stories that it was applied to it, like retroactively, like we are now doing with the Dogman in reference to the Converse werewolf and the Wolver, and et cetera, et cetera. So as far as tulpas, yeah, I'm totally down with it. I believe it's more like it exists as a screen for something else, be it fey folk interference or something of that nature. I mean, I jokingly refer to the fey as I have my select, entities, staple entities that I refer to the fey as burger goblins and Yif Kings. The on my logo I have the white fox, and that is a representation of the Asian fox spirit, kitsune, which is a troublesome spirit, which is the mischievous spirit, which I believe is I definitely factor that into it. I mean,
Yeah.
have I actually met one? But I have no problem regarding any foul up or anything that anytime your keys go missing or whatever. I have no problem blaming that upon the put bearing that upon the shoulders of burger goblins and Yif Kings.
Yeah.
So
Um, I,
I hope that answers your question.
yeah, definitely. I've got to say as well, and sorry if I'm constantly referring to all my favourite TV shows, but I know that you've got
Yeah.
a program called Paranormal Caught on Camera, which I absolutely love. And on that TV show, and I couldn't tell you which episode, um, there was someone who caught the white fox on camera in
Hmm.
China. And it was absolutely fascinating to watch. They were at a Chinese festival in a small village somewhere, and they caught this white fox on camera. It was fantastic.
Oh, that's cool. If you run across that, you'll have to forward that to me because I'd love to check that out.
Yeah.
The as far as it just goes to show like the cultural proliferation of whatever it is that these entities are, that we see it across, across the pond, so to speak, in that, it's like everybody has stories of little people, everybody has stories of giants. You'll find dragons everywhere, and they may not always look the same, like the European dragon is different than the Chinese dragon, as is different than other dragons like in the US. I don't know if we have our dragons as much, but it's this sort of, there's these commonalities that I think tie into real things somehow. I can't pin it down exactly, but I'm sure that like a lot of more studied and versed people have come forward with, their takes on it. I don't know. I don't know what to
Well,
make of it, but yeah, I think we're on the right track there.
definitely. I don't know about you, Chris, but I just find that the more research I do, and I've said this so many times, the more research I do, the less I feel I know, because more and more questions come out. Um, and I find it quite frustrating because I'm interested in everything. So therefore, I think I am a master of nothing. Maybe if I just picked one area and researched that for the rest of my life, I might find something out about it. But I think I'm too broad. I'm interested in too many things, I think.
Yeah, that's a good problem to have. That is a good problem to have. Is to stretch yourself too thin in this field. Yeah, I try to relegate my interest specifically to ETs and cryptids. That is my primary interest. I'm not all that interested in the UFO drama and the field of that nature and anything expanding to that. So when that comes up, but I am leaving myself open to these other things and how they fit into the paradigms as far as what I make reference to. So I can understand that, just staying on on path specific. Even then, I'm still bumping into other things. But of course, I definitely stay open minded to that. Like when people make reference to poltergeist activity after an alien encounter or something of that nature, well, they'll have like, I'm not a ghost guy, but that's usually when my ears perk up for like, oh, poltergeist activity. And then when I listen to their story, they usually yada yada that part, and that's the one time I'm actively listening. Yeah, so I can understand how all these fields. I mean, over time they'll eventually bleed into each other. I know
Mm.
that in the more strict groups such as MUFON and the BFRO and all these other projects, they're usually very strict about, we don't do aliens if we're these guys, or we don't do X, Y, and Z if we're this field. If you're coming to us, you're just reporting X, Y, and Z, and that's it. And I understand that they're relaxing their standards to be more open, as a lot of these stories tend to have overlap. And I'm noticing that a lot, that even if you are in your select field, it's very hard to not trip over the other stuff as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there is an element of things being far more connected than we ever thought they were. Um, I mean, often there is UFO activity around where Bigfoot is sighted,
Hmm.
particularly anomalous light. Um, the all sorts sort of seems to be connected, and as you say, poltergeist activity being connected to UFOs and ETs, and it might just all be connected. Um,
Hmm.
and this is what I mean. The more I find out, the less I feel like I know. But
Yeah,
it's quite
exactly.
nice.
Yeah, it is a big old mess. It's hard to pin down everything because the phenomenon doesn't cooperate. It doesn't stay still. It won't let us pin it down in a lab or something like that and dissect it. It's. I mean, it keeps us coming, but at the end, it's like, are we chasing our own shadows? And if that's the case, then what does that say about us? As sentient creatures, as lords of everything. That we're striking at shadows and all that stuff, and we don't even know that there are shadows in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of it.
I think we just I think for what it's worth, my opinion is that we just need to stay open minded, and try and be kind to each other, because nothing is gained by being, mean to each other, or being selfish and saying, well, I don't want to know about your thing. Or I think if we just all have an open mind and try and work together as much as we can, we will learn more in the end, I hope.
Yeah, yeah, that I agree. That is a good position to have on this field. It's very difficult to maintain though, because it's good when you and me practice it, but when we run into other people, then that's when the problems start up.
Yeah.
Is that, oh, we have to factor in, oh, everybody has we have to run into everybody else too, and they all have their thoughts and opinions and their directions that they go in and all that nature, and it is rather fun. I guess we're in the last 20 minutes of the interview. I would love to discuss with you Doctor Who and stuff like that, if you would indulge me for a bit, and then we'll wrap up if that would be fine with you.
It will be fine, but can I just say before you start talking to me, I'm not an expert. My son is actually the expert in our family. Although I did watch Doctor Who all the way from when I was about 5 years old. I haven't watched it in the last couple of years, so I'm slightly nervous now in case you ask me something that I don't know.
No, that's okay. In a similar vein, much like yourself, I too was tagged along when I think it was I got into Doctor Who like for myself. I do remember the what is it was it the Fifth Doctor, the one with the scarf and K9, the robot
Oh
dog.
yeah, yeah. Tom. Oh God, my brain now. Tom, he was called.
Yeah, yeah. I believe he was the fifth, I think, and
Yeah,
and and his iteration. I remember watching it as a small child, and I saw that, and it got familiar. I didn't see all the episodes, but it was a passing interest. I really didn't care. It was just something that was on television that caught my interest.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
later on,
Tom
during
Baker.
the
That's it. Tom
yeah,
Baker.
Tom Baker, and then afterwards, I'm going through television, the cable TV and all this stuff, and I see um, Chris Eccleston, and I believe he's the ninth, and
Yep.
and he was, I see the show, and it's a sci-fi show, and this guy, he's doing all these crazy things. He's got his, and I keep seeing these telltales of this other stuff that's familiar, and it doesn't hit me that it's Doctor Who specifically. I'm like, what the heck is this guy? What is this? Because it's brand new. It's not old stuff. It's not classic Who. It's something totally fresh and different.
Yeah.
And then I and then it finally all comes back to me, and it's like, oh my god, that's Doctor Who. And I was so blown away by that, because I do remember the Eighth Doctor, which was the Fox made for TV movie, and I saw that and I loved it. I didn't get it at the time because I wasn't familiar as I am now, and then I
Yeah.
watched it and I had so much fun with it. And the Eighth Doctor, so I would have to say Eccleston was pretty much my Doctor. And then I think I watched up until the first season of Matt Smith, and then I stopped.
Oh, poor old Matt Smith. A lot of people stopped watching when Matt Smith came on. I feel a bit sorry for him. Yeah. My son's favourite one's David Tennant. He loves
Oh
David
yeah,
Tennant.
he's definitely a fan favorite. I can see why everybody liked him, because he had such a good run.
Yeah.
And the at the time I was more incentivized to watch it because at the time I was dating my girlfriend was heavily into it. And at that time, um, I guess Doctor Who had hit its golden resurgence, and this was in like I guess the early to mid 2000s, I guess later 2000s, where it was all the rage at the
Yeah.
time before it had settled down. and and we would get together. Our date nights were just sitting on the couch watching Doctor Who,
Oh, wow.
and that was sort of our thing. And then we really got into Torchwood because I love Torch. I fell in love with the character of Captain Jack Sparrow. I still have like they're definitely old photos of me going to conventions like 10, 10, 20 years ago or whatever, where I'm dressed up as Captain Jack. I got this army surplus blue overcoat, and I replaced the pins with the more seals to make it try to look as much like his as I could.
Oh,
And it was fantastic. And me and my girlfriend, we would watch Netflix, and this was when they were, trying out streaming for the first time. And what they would do is they would give you a season, but they would leave one episode out, so that way you would order the DVDs,
that's
and
naughty.
then yeah, I know it is. So we would watch like seasons of Torchwood, and there would be like an episode missing, and then we'd have to guess what happened. But that was sort of our fun thing. And she grew up on Doctor Who, and I think her middle name was after one of the Doctor Who companions and stuff. So we had a lot of fun with it, and it was a fun thing. And even afterwards, looking back on it, that's one of my most treasured memories of it. So I definitely got a lot out of it.
Yeah, I did. I was when I first started watching it, it was I'm giving away my age now. It was John Pertwee when I was really small, and I used to have terrible nightmares. And I was banned from watching it for years because that and Scooby Doo, if you could believe that. Scooby Doo used to give me nightmares as well.
Mm.
Um and then, yeah, when I was a bit older, when Tom Baker came on, and then I was finally allowed to watch it, and I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, yeah. It's great because it gives you this sort of it's there are so many things about it. I remember episodes with ghosts and aliens. It's not always aliens. There's ghosts and other stuff too, and other stuff that scratches that paranormal itch. And I just
Yeah,
love it so much. And I guess with the lead in with the Torchwood, that was fun too because of course Captain Jack is a very charismatic character, and then on top of that, it's sort of like the aftermath of all of these you know I guess that's probably the most like sort of realistic feel of what would happen to the world, once everything is out of the bag, a sort of that gives us a glimpse of a post disclosure world, I think in the
yeah,
most funnest sense where you have this organization that has to deal with it, under this guise of cloak and dagger that's, officiated by the government in an official capacity. And,
yeah.
and it's really fun and entertaining. Did you ever get into Torchwood?
No, I didn't. But now I'm thinking that maybe I ought to watch it. No, it sort of passed me by. I think it was probably at a point in my life where I was busy doing other things. But I tell you what, I did watch, which I absolutely adored, The X Files. Did you ever used to
Hmm.
watch that? And I
Yeah,
know
I
it's
caught a couple
different, but
episodes.
I love that.
Yeah, it is fun. It is a really good series. I didn't get too deep into it, but I love the archetype of the characters. I love the contrast of the characters. Between Fox Mulder, he's this believer, and Scully is this skeptic. But
Yeah.
every now and then they would throw an episode where they would flip the script, where if it had to deal with religious context, because Scully, although she's highly skeptical, she's very faith based. And
Mm.
I think they had one where they had what is it the what do they call it where you have the things on your palms, the stigmata.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
They had an episode regarding stigmata, and and Scully was the one who was, the one about who was chasing shadows and all that stuff, and Fox Mulder was the skeptical stick in the mud, and it was fun to see that sort of that flip of these character archetypes, and
Yeah,
those were my favorite episodes. Were the ones where they had to go against the grain, in addition to the humorous ones.
yeah.
What about you?
Well, I just absolutely love them all. I can't remember one in particular, I have to say. But I just remember sitting down with my friend, and there was some. I think it was the reruns that we ended up watching when I was at university, and we'd sit down every week and watch it. And she had a crush on Mulder, so that,
Hmm.
I think that's why she agreed to watch it with me. But there really
Yeah.
wasn't much to watch.
Hmm.
Back in this, I'm talking about the 90s now, there wasn't a lot to watch except for Most Haunted in the UK and the X Files. If you wanted something to do with paranormal,
Yeah. Yeah. I do feel like a lot of us, a lot of that stuff. It's really fun to take these, and they dealt with so many issues that we're dealing with now. Like they had an episode on tulpas. They had an episode on shapeshifters, all different kinds. They had so many different kinds of shapeshifters, and they had episodes on. I think it was an episode on werewolves that was really good.
yeah,
That was really interesting, and I liked how they definitely approach it. And I know like a lot of people like to like to regard like that they try to attribute this like, well, maybe they had insider info and stuff of this nature, which I don't know. I don't know if I want to throw that in, but I hear that where this stuff is so proliferate. Um, it's it's so it's so what's the word I'm looking for? It's so ingrained in
prolific.
the
No,
yeah, that's it.
maybe. I'm just guessing.
Exactly. It's so prolific in the culture that some people have to guess, well, was this influence? Did these guys have an inside track? Or is it the other where because it's so prolific that whatever reality out there is shaping itself to that because it's expected, which sort of gets into my gentrification theory,
Yeah,
where like is everything's is everything showing up like that because it's expected, because that figure, well, that's what our preconceptions of whatever our encounters are going to be, and I don't know, it's sort of like a sort of cosmic chicken and the egg
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
So I've got a question for you, Chris. If we're going just for fun to combine our hobbies and our leisure time activities, is there a film that you have watched that you would say aligns more or less with what you believe in to do with things like ETs? Is there a film that you watched where you went, yes, yes, I feel like they've got it right here?
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite movies. It was a box office bomb. It's called Jupiter Ascending. Now,
Ah,
there's this fun little thing where it's I just loved it because of the grandiose of it, but the backdrop of this alien culture sort of farming people for you know um, immortality juice is really interesting. But it's just the little things where they put in these little digs culturally that I think dealt with it, where they had the Greys, and the Greys were these sort of these they would infiltrate the society and try to run it, but they were like they would use like screen technology to disguise their appearances, and there was always some nefarious underdealing with almost every aspect of our lives that dealt with them, and they would like easily erase and wipe people's memories and do all this long term stuff that was so interesting. And they would throw in little jokes like where whenever a spacecraft would take off, underneath it would be crop circles, where it which whatever thrusters it left crop circle indentations. it's one of my it's definitely one of my favorites. It's very it's not a good movie, you know, but for me, for what I like it for, it's a great movie. So if you got it in your catalog, definitely watch it. It's a good it's a good, you know, shoot 'em up type of film with this sort of long arching narrative that you know that I think sort of speaks to a lot of, you know, what I think is totally cool stuff. That, you know, if that's what aliens and stuff and ghosts and all that stuff are all about, then I'm totally down with it. That's definitely my favorite account. What about yourself? Which one do you think out there speaks more prolifically to what you enjoy, or
What I
what about
believe
you?
in. Yeah. I suppose
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go with the ghost side for me. And it's a film that really made me think a lot, and I had to immediately watch it again, which is The Sixth Sense with Bruce Willis. And it just I did not realize I'm so happy that I didn't know what the twist was at the end. And it actually made me go all cold at the end when I realized what had happened. And then I had to go back and watch it knowing what the twist was and going, "Oh, wow, yeah, I get it now." But I just felt it with my beliefs about what ghosts are, it was really on the spot for me. And I have to say, with the alien one, if I can push that in as well, it still has to be Close Encounters of the Third Kind for me.
Yeah.
Um, it really does.
Yeah, those are good choices. Really good choices. Yeah, it's mine is more schlock, but yours is definitely more well thought out, more well produced, more well received type of stuff. And I could definitely see that and using that as sort of like inspiration and stuff of that nature. It's those are good choices as well.
There's so many though. I mean, so
Yeah.
many good ones, and even the cheesy ones like Ghost with good old Patrick Swayze. There was still something in that made me go, "Oh, maybe it's like that."
Yeah, that had some really good elements too. That, you know, like when people are pushed into this other dimension, how are they able to interact with it? And then how the cats can see everything, you know,
Yeah,
and then we have, of course, the shadow people that if you're on a certain path, they immediately drag you away. And it's there's like deeper things into it that we find in on this in this stuff, and that takes me back again to the chicken and egg. You know, is it because, you know, that's what's out there? Or is it that's what's out there because we're expected to see that from what's been presented to us? You know, so it's definitely intriguing.
it is. Maybe we are just all in a matrix and we're all just little puppets on a screen.
Yeah. As far as the M. Night Shyamalan type of stuff, I really enjoyed his Unbreakable movie,
Oh, I haven't
where
seen that
it's
one.
that sort of like that thing about how it played into the sort of mythology of superheroes. And that one was a lot of fun for me because I'm a comic book guy. So I sort of, you know, that was sort of like a twist that was, you know, tailor made just for me specifically. And that was well before the Marvel stuff
Yeah.
became prominent, and
Yeah.
everything became Marvel movies and stuff of this nature.
Yeah. My eldest son, who's nearly 18, got me to watch a few episodes. Is it called The Boys? Where
I believe so.
the
Yeah.
superheroes are just everything always goes wrong and they end up accidentally killing humans in the most disgusting and horrible way, like stepping on them or throwing them into walls and they pulverize them. It was quite funny, actually, I have to say, although it's not my normal viewing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of, I guess, because superheroes is sort of it right now. And I think that's sort of, you know, channeling now because I think it's sort of starting to wear out. It's sort of chasing new audiences, and the older audiences are moving to other stuff. And I think is that the, um, with like the superhero and stuff, it's like, you know, what would a world be like with people with these extraordinary abilities? And yet, us in the paranormal field, there are people who feel like they're already living it through either psychic um, influences or being just having an awareness about it. Like I'm sure you and me can come up to points in our lives where we felt this sort of awareness of something else that we've crossed about it. And I don't think either of us would, you know, label ourselves psychics or mediums on the prominent level of some of our peers. But it's just I do feel there's this innate what do you call it intuition that a lot of us just really it strikes us a certain way, and I think that's what we feel.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, I definitely have lots of occasions where things happen and sort of knew they were going to happen, but I wouldn't call myself a medium, although I am interested in exploring that side as well.
Yeah, I guess we'll go ahead and end things here. This has been a fantastic interview, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's been great. Thanks very much for
Yeah,
inviting me.
yeah. So go ahead and let everybody know what your show is and where to find you.
Okay, so my podcast is called Paranormal or What Podcast. It can be found on all good podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple, Google, Chromecast, you name it, you can find me on it. My Facebook pages, I've got one under Paranormal or What Podcast. I've just started a new business Facebook page because I have too many friends, apparently, which is a very nice position to be in. I'm also on Instagram and X under either Michaela Ford or Paranormal or What Podcast. So please listen and see what you think.
All right, and links will be provided in the show notes. So thank you, and
Fantastic.
we'll catch you next time. We're definitely going to have to follow up on some of the stuff that we've been talking about later. So
Definitely.
hopefully we'll definitely run into each other again. So thank you for your time.
Okay. Thanks very much, Chris. Cheers. Bye.